Hello. Hello. Yeah, I'll record a little bit with this camera, then later on when we're looking at the software I'll switch over to recording straight off the screen here. Yeah, I kind of know what you mean. I use it very much as a tool. I prefer to be sort of taking photographs than sitting in front of a computer. So like a lot of photographers, I basically use it as a way of adding a bit of polish to, you know, and improving what I've already got. But hopefully the stuff I've already got is you know, about correct in terms of things like exposure and whatnot, which we'll come on to. But it's quite a... sorry, let me just check that was actually recording. But you were saying about, you know, forgetting stuff and everything. I went to a seminar with a very eminent person a few years ago in Manchester, and he was showing us this stuff in Photoshop. I was like, oh, it's amazing, you know, the stuff you can do. But one thing he said kind of resonated a bit, which he says it's sort of like the opposite of riding a bicycle. You do forget how to do it. And he said the best thing is to keep doing it, and you know, most weeks is just keep plugging away and trying stuff. And certainly, you know, I use it quite a lot. I use Lightroom a lot. But I tend to use it in the same way. Usually I kind of do it to improve what I've already got and just add a bit of polish, and also as a sort of workflow thing to choose which images you want to use. Again, we'll talk more about that and having a practical experience of that as well. So it's yeah, but what I've got is on my bookmarks file on YouTube. I've got a whole rack of saved little films about doing certain things, and I don't know how to do that. You know, you look it up, and there's some usually an American telling you how to do this stuff, and I find that very useful actually. You know, so but unless you're using the same sort of tools and stuff a lot, it's certainly for myself, it does tend to go out of my head sometimes, and I have to have a little refresher from time to time.
Because when we did use Lightroom, it was kind of the same. We were doing the same few things, and
yeah, I remember used it from. As I see my dad's slaves and all that. So so stuff was coming in off the scanner.
Yeah.
And there was different types of film and stuff had aged differently.
Yeah. And you get all the funny colours and stuff.
Yeah. So you were tending to just almost use the auto correct for a lot of it, because
and that works.
It was easy and quick.
That works okay a lot of the time. It's not a panacea, but yeah, that's obviously and if you've got 100 scanned images, you don't want to be spending half an hour on each one, because it's you know, it's a huge sort of
6,000.
So yeah, we'll have a chance to have a bit of a play, and if there's anything specific that you're wanting to know about, kind of let me know and I'll include it. I'm going to cover the stuff which I think is generally useful. I won't guarantee I know everything, because it's a huge bit of, I mean, especially Photoshop is an enormous bit of software. You know, some of the stuff, and they're always adding new stuff on it as well. I don't claim to know it inside out, but I know it's enough to do what I need to do with it, which is the important thing, really. So unless you're a real kind of sort of techie nerd, or you have to know it, sort of, if you're spending all your time doing retouching and stuff like that, there's not that many people who know it absolutely inside out, because like I say, both these things, especially Photoshop's a huge bit of software. So you might already know this, but just to start with, I think, well, how do you get it? Well, it sounds like you've already got a copy of the software. There's a few different options you've got. You can get a package which is just under £10 a month, which gives you Lightroom and Photoshop. They're the two really useful ones for still photography. To buy the whole Adobe Creative Suite, as it's called, is, you know, well, £50 a year. That's quite a lot. Now, obviously, if you're doing it for your business, that's a taxable expense. You can claim it back against tax. Yeah. But if you're not, that's a fair chunk of change to go out. And there's so many, you know, there's about sort of 15 or so different bits of software, including things like Premiere Pro for film editing, InDesign for layout, and you know, all this stuff for doing sort of special effects in films and stuff like that. And you might only be using a fraction of it, so it's quite a lot of money. However, if you are working in education, you can buy the whole lot. You don't have to use the whole lot, but you can buy the whole lot for just over £16 a month, which is a very good deal. I'm fortunate that I get it free through the university, but that's probably the one I go for. So if you work in school, college, or even if you're training other people, usually you can, even if you're only involved marginally in education, you can usually get this sort of very significant discount, and then you just install whichever software you need. And obviously the advantage of doing it that way, as opposed to buying a disc and installing it on your computer, is you get updates. They'll remind you, you know, every now and again you'll get a thing saying, well, there's a new version, do you want to get it? And it usually doesn't change it that much, so it's not like you've got to go back to scratch and learn it all over again. It's usually little things they've added or changes they've made, usually as a result of suggestions from other photographers. So, and again, for various reasons, when they bring out new cameras, you might find if you buy a brand new camera and you bang an image onto, you know, Photoshop, for example, it'll go, don't recognise that format, so you have to update it in order to do that. So my idea for tonight was just to start off with a level playing field. Is we'll actually go and take a few photos during the first part of the evening. I was thinking just outside there because it's quite good. They've got the fair going on there. There should be a gap in the weather.
I was going to say it's raining.
Right, okay. Well, it was just about stopped when I went out before, but hopefully it won't start again. There are sheltered areas that we can use. We won't be out there for very long, and I'm not necessarily proposing that we do this every evening. In fact, after this evening, it might be good, you know, you can bring your own images along because that's the stuff you're interested in, you know, so if you've got any of your father's scans, or if you've got any even stuff left over from when you had your company set up, you know, we can bring those and have a bit of an experiment.
What camera?
No, you don't need one for tonight. I've got some. they're Canon DSLRs, so I can show you. We'll just use them in a fairly simple sort of way. I'm not expecting you to necessarily know that much about the camera. Okay, so yeah, and kind of we'll see how we go. Really, if that sounds all right. Yeah. So I'll see. You know, if you've got any specific things you want to know, you can make a note. Everyone learns in different ways, I think. So I haven't got any handouts as such. If there are any specific things that you want me to sort of get a handout for, but what I tend to find is there's so many resources online. You know, I can just regurgitate something that's already online. But like I say, I find YouTube a very useful resource for knowing specific things about these bits of software, because someone will have made a video about it, and that's how I, you know, if there's something I'm not quite sure about, I tend to do it that way. Yeah, okay so far? Okay. Right. Just to start with, and you guys might know this already, I don't know, but because like I say, this is pitched at beginners, so I didn't anticipate people knowing about this stuff. RAW and JPEG, is that something that rings any bells? Yeah, okay. Do you know what the difference is between them?
RAW is like a massive file that allows you to do more.
They're bigger.
Post-production.
They're bigger files.
It's essentially straight off the sensor almost.
That's it, yeah.
The JPEG's been compressed down into...
So Basically what it is, especially in the early days of photography, the early days of digital photography, the big problem was storage space, because computers, you know, going back sort of 20 years or more, computers didn't have very big hard drives, they weren't very fast, they were designed for doing processing text and numbers, which are very easy to, they don't take that much room, but pictures do, and videos do times 10, you know, as you might know. So one of the things that they did to start with was the manufacturers of photographic equipment, computers, printers and all the industry standard stuff and the nascent internet sat down together and formed this sort of group of experts and decided to sort of say, well, we need to find some way of making images such that, because obviously when you take a digital photograph it's compressed into data, into zeros and ones when you break it right down. And in order to decode that, to turn it back into an image, if you email it to someone or put it on a memory stick or something like that, then the other person at the other end needs to have the same encryption that they can turn it into a photograph, so it's not just lines of code or gibberish. So the name of this this sort of committee was the Joint Photographic Experts Group, JPEG, and that's what they came up with, JPEG.
Is that what that's from?
Yeah, Joint Photographic Experts Group, there you go.
No one says that, do they? It's always JPEG.
Yeah, well, it's easy to say. So one of the things JPEG is generic, so everything will read JPEG. So if you take a photograph on your mobile phone, as far as I know, all mobile phones shoot JPEGs. And you can upload those straight onto Instagram, Photoshop. You can make a print from that down at Max Spielman or printer, and it's universally recognised. So a JPEG is a JPEG. So all cameras have a JPEG. What they do is they use various clever algorithms to sort of compress the data down. with fairly minimal loss of quality, you know. So JPEGs can be high quality. They are pretty good, and even some, I've heard of even wedding photographers who just have their camera switch to JPEG just because it's, you know, quicker and stuff. But the problem is this compression, you do lose a bit of information, and the other thing they do is they don't record, it's to do with bit depth, which is the sort of tonal ranges of stuff. It's slightly compressed. So when you start to mess about with those pictures like we're going to be doing, that's when you start to lose quality. So you find things like banding, you know, for example, you might take a photograph of this wall, don't know why I'd want to do that, but you can see it's lighter down here and it goes gradually darker. And when you shoot a JPEG, when you start to mess about with the exposure, it quite often forms a sort of bands of different tonal values, and you can see an edge between them, you know, it's not quite as smooth as it should be. So obviously when it looked like everything was going digital, they wanted to sell their equipment, their cameras and their software and everything to professional photographers. So they realised that they needed an uncompressed format. Okay, so as Neil quite correctly said, RAW is completely uncompressed. And they're sometimes referred to as RAW being a lossless format, because you don't lose any data when you take a photograph, and JPEG being a lossy format. So normally, if you're shooting, and especially if you know that you're going to be manipulating these photographs, and I don't necessarily mean totally changing them, I'm just talking about jigging about with things like exposure, contrast and colour and stuff like that, you will tend to have your camera set to RAW, which it sounds like you guys already know how to do. If you want to bring your cameras next week, by the way, you know, like I say, we're not going to be necessarily doing loads of shooting because this is about the software. But you know, we can have a look at that. So RAW basically is uncompressed. There's a little sort of processor thing in the digital cameras which, when you take a photograph and it's set to JPEG, will compress the image, okay, turn it into a JPEG for you. Most cameras you can set it to both, so it will shoot a RAW and a JPEG. It won't take two photos, but it will record one faithfully and it will compress the other one, so you've got two versions of each picture, which is quite useful because if you just want to quickly email one to somebody, you can with a JPEG without having to feed it through this, you know, software. And the RAW is the sort of high quality one, and as you said, Chris, the RAWs take up a lot more space on the cards and on the computer, usually about 3 times the memory, you know. So, but these days,
but we just found if we didn't shoot in RAW, there was just less you could do with it in Lightroom afterwards.
Exactly.
You stuck on it with what you've got.
So I don't have to convince you about that already. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we tried because you
I'm aware of it, but never really used it. I've always got JPEG.
Yeah.
But
it's amazing the difference it can make, though, like with an image of a face or whatever, with the tone of the skin and everything, you can just do so much.
When you just compare the two next to each other, a high quality JPEG RAW, they sometimes look a little bit different, but it doesn't look like RAW looks massively better quality. But you will notice the difference when you, like I say, when you start to do stuff to the image. That's when it kicks in. The interesting thing is that most of the clients I work with, they actually want a JPEG image because, for reasons that I'll come to in a minute, RAW can be a bit problematic for the people on the other end. So what I normally do is if I'm working for, like, recently I was shooting some stills event at Nottingham University, I will shoot them in RAW, drop them into usually Lightroom, make any adjustments that I need to make a selection of those images because they don't want all of them usually, they just want the best ones. Make any adjustments that I need to make, and the last thing I'll do is save it as a new version, as a JPEG. So you've got the original RAW, which is a bit like having the negatives, and then the JPEG is sort of like the print. And even though I'm doing that, the JPEG will be better quality because the RAW processor in a computer is a hell of a lot better than the RAW processor in a camera. So I tried it once actually. I shot a RAW photograph on the camera, and then I shot exactly the same photograph on high quality JPEG, and I think the RAW one was about sort of 30 odd megabytes. It varies depending on what it is you're photographing. I don't know if you knew that, but if you're photographing stuff with a lot of detail, the actual size of the file goes up. You know, so say that was, I don't know, 30 or 40 megabytes or something like that. And then I shot a JPEG, which was about, I don't know, 10 or 12 megabytes. Then I fed the raw file into, I think it was Photoshop, and I did nothing to it. I just saved it as a JPEG. And I found out that the final file was a lot bigger, the JPEG that I got out of the computer, than the one in the camera. It's about twice the size. And that shows you that there's more information being recorded just through when I convert from RAW to JPEG using this software. And that's, I think, mostly true. You know, for the clients I work with, there are other compression formats as well. One of the ones I sometimes use for printing is something called TIFF, which is similar to RAW. It's called stands for tagged image file format. And again, it's a lossless format, but if you're working with printers, they can actually recognise TIFF because they'll be using software like that will recognise a TIFF file. RAW, the problem with RAW is it's not a generic format. The RAW on your camera is going to be different than on my camera, it's going to be different than on your camera. And even if we've all got the same model of cameras, even if we all use Canons, for example, depending on how new or posh your camera is, the RAW might be different. So if you were to send a RAW file to the client, they would need all these different they'd be able to read all these different versions of RAW, and they haven't necessarily got that. That's why they tend to prefer JPEGs. So, like I say, RAW is sort of non-generic.
We used to edit with it and then send it as JPEGs,
So presumably you were making prints to give to clients, so the children's photographs.
Prints, but then we started, just choose them and give them digital images when we would give them JPEG.
Yeah.
That's what the last thing we would do is convert it back to JPEG.
That's fairly normal, yeah. So you know this already.
Oh, not really. We were making it up as we went along. So.
That's, I mean, like when I first learned Photoshop, it was back in the mid-90s when I was at university, and we only had 2 computers, really old bicycle, like should have been like Stone Age compared with what we've got now. But we only had a couple of classes, and after that we had to sort of teach ourselves, because it was brand new, we didn't have the resources. But like I say, because RAW records without compressing and also gives us that greater bit depth, it lends itself a lot better to post-production. So what I've actually done is I've got cameras for you today, and hopefully if the weather's not too filthy, we can go and try and take a few photos just outside here, because they've got the fair, which I think might be quite good. It's also going to be very confusing to the camera. So that's one of the things, is I don't necessarily expect you to get a perfect image in terms of things like exposure, and that way we've got something to get our teeth into and something to improve. Shall I close that door? How's the temperature in here, by the way?
It's alright for me.
You're alright, okay. We have got air conditioning, so if it gets a bit stuffy, just let me know. Oh, one thing I didn't tell you, sorry, housekeeping. We've got a sort of 8:45 we're finishing so
I didn't notice the end time.
yeah, 6:25. We're going to we'll have a break in the middle, maybe next week. So if you want to get yourself a coffee or anything, you can bring, if you want to bring something with you, that's fine. But they do coffees downstairs. They put them in a paper cup, and you're welcome to bring them up here. That's absolutely fine. And the toilets are just along that corridor, just on the left there. There's 2 or 3 kind of individual cubicle toilets. So, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, fire alarm. It's never happened yet, but if there is a fire alarm, everyone runs screaming for the exits. It's basically out the front where you came in, and there is another exit along that corridor. It's never happened yet, but you never know. Someone says if I don't tell you where the exits are, we'll have a fire alarm. Sorry, I shouldn't have told you that first thing. What was the other thing? Excuse me, let me just refer back to my notes. Okay. So, the other thing I was, because again, I'm having to think of stuff that I don't normally have to think about. These computers, these are fairly new MacBook Pros, okay, they're pretty good. They're only a year or two old. What I'm going to try and do is see if we can get the same computers each week. So if you just want to make a note, there should be a Dymo label on the front there. If you just 17. Okay, so if you just make a note of that. What I suggest that we do from here on is we'll put some images on the computer. There is a chance, because these computers get used by other groups as well, that they might get re-imaged or something and you might lose stuff. So do you have a little memory, not necessarily with you tonight?
Not with me today, but I've got one.
Like a little pen drive or something like that?
Something, yeah.
Okay, that's cool. If you bring it with you next week, we can make sure we've got this stuff backed up if you want to keep it, I've got adapters, these are USB-C, these are new ones. I've got your mice as well. We have got the trackpads, you can use the trackpad if you prefer, but most people prefer mice. Yeah, well they're a bit easier on the wrists and stuff, I think. Yeah, well some people use are these Wacom tablet things. I used to have one, and when I replaced my Macintosh I never got another one. I should really, because they're supposed to be better for avoiding. Yeah, the other thing is they take a little while to get used to, so I wasn't proposing to get them for this session, because it takes an hour or two to get into the rhythm of using them. They are very good, and I think the idea is they're much less likely to give you carpal tunnel and stuff like that, but we're not going to be doing this so long, hopefully we don't have any problems like that. If we bring memory sticks, then we can sort of upload stuff each week. Do either of you use Macintosh computers at all?
Yeah.
My partner uses one.
Okay.
And it really frustrates me because she keeps asking me tricky questions about it, whether if it was a
PC, yeah.
normal laptop.
I have the same problem with my wife uses PCs, and they always throw me when she asks me to do anything they do take a bit of getting used to, but I think when we're in the software it's going to be very similar to a PC, so it's not going to trip you up too much.
The last time I did the course it was on a Mac.
Yeah, well, the sort of in the arts and stuff and media they tend to prefer Macs. There's good and bad points about Macs and PCs, but I realise it might not be exactly what you're used to. Anyway, we'll see how we get on. Okay, so I think, shall we go and take some photos? Now what I've done is I've set up both these cameras, they're already set to RAW.
Okay.
They're also set to quite a low ISO. The reason being that although it's night time and normally you'd be using do you guys know about ISOs? I imagine you probably do. The ISO is you tell me.
Effectively, the film speed, sensitivity of the sensor
to light, Basically, the bigger the number, the more sensitive the camera is to light. So if you're photographing somewhere like a museum where you're not allowed to use flash, you can use like 1600 or 3200 ISO. And then if you're photographing sort of bright sunshine or whatever, it's normally 100, 200 ISO. Does anyone know the disadvantage of setting a very high ISO?
Quite a grainy image, potentially.
Grainy, noise, especially in the dark areas. Having said that, modern cameras are very good compared with what they used to be, so you can set fairly high ISOs.
I quite like that effect sometimes as well.
Sometimes it can be alright. It's odd. It's not quite like high-speed film. It doesn't look the same. It's pixely, but it's I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just saying that's the reason why people normally use the lowest ISO they can get away with. I've got tripods that you guys can use, so we can use long shutter speeds, or if the camera needs to use a long shutter speed, we can do that. And because it's on a tripod, the long shutter speeds aren't going to result in camera shake, hopefully. So if that sounds sensible, so that's why I've set them to a fairly low ISO, even though we're doing nighttime stuff. Okay, so let me switch this camera off before I forget. Okay, so workflow. This is something that and I must admit I'm pretty bad at this, but the one thing you find is, as you're creating a lot of images that where are they? You know, it can be a real problem. And my desktop at home is a horrible mess. It's like my study, you know, it's covered in files and stuff like that. Obviously, images and stuff, you know, you can fit quite a lot on a computer. If you're doing a lot of photography, and some of you might already have this, is you've got a couple of options. Again, through Adobe, you can get a certain amount of free storage on what's called the cloud through Google and people like that. Or you can pay a bit more if you want more storage. The idea being that is if someone nicks your computer, you can, when you get a new one, you can retrieve all that data. I've also got a hard drive, which is partly because I do a lot for the video stuff I do, which takes an enormous amount of space up. Hard drives are basically just a separate thing which sits, you know, about the size of a small paperback book. And the one I've got, I've had it a few years. I think it cost me about 80 quid, and it's 2 terabytes. Which is 2,000 gigabytes, which is a lot, you know, and they're not that expensive. I think it cost me about 50 quid, something like that. So that's another route to go down. But, you know, if you're not doing loads and loads of stuff, you might find that you can do it on your computer without running out of storage. But it's always a good idea to sort of be a bit systematic about how you go about creating where you put the images, just so you can find them again afterwards. And particularly with Lightroom, not so much Photoshop, but Lightroom retrieves stuff that the last place it was in. So if you put your images somewhere and then you move them somewhere else on the computer from one file to another, it scares the hell out of you, because you open up Photoshop and all the images are greyed out. And you can't do anything with them. Now, there is a way of retrieving them, which again you can Google. It's fairly straightforward, but much easier not to have that problem in the first place. So normally I've got my hard drive sort of 2 sections, one section for still photography and one for video. You know, as long as you've got a system that you understand, that you can go through these files and find fairly easily the stuff that you know you might want to look at it in a year's time or something like that. So what I normally do is, shall I just dim the lights a bit so you can see the screen? Is that all right for you?
Yeah, it's fine.
That's good.
Okay. I'm going to switch it off altogether. You can import the photos into Lightroom straight from the camera, but what I suggest is a good idea is to create a new file. So I'm just going to go to hang on, this is set different now. I'm on Safari, that's why. If you go to File, New Folder, now you can do it on, because you've got mice, I'm using my trackpad. If you do a right click, I think it'll open up a little dialog box, and one of the options on there is New Folder. And if you've got if it's just on the desktop, it should appear like it says there, Untitled Folder, highlighted in blue. If I click on where it says Untitled Folder just once, I can edit that. So, you know, give it a name. It's not my computer, so I'll call it John's PP for Post-Production 101. You can call it whatever you like, as long as you remember what it is.
I don't know why it's not highlighting it, so I can tell. Oh yeah, I think that's done.
You got it? Okay. Yeah, it's if you click on the file rather than the thing, it'll sort of just go white and it'll just say Untitled. But you know, it's useful to be able to give it a name. You know, it doesn't have to be on the desktop. It could be, you know, in My Pictures or whatever. However you set your computer up, you know, it could be in a separate drive, which usually appears as an icon on the screen. But for the time being, we'll just use the desktop. So that's an empty file. So what we need to do is, I'll show you this. I've got 2 of these, so we're going to have to just share these little plug-in thingies. So I'll show you, if you're not aware, how to take the SD card out of your camera. And what should happen is when you plug it into this little adapter, it'll appear on the screen. Whoops. And it's actually opened Lightroom for me, which I didn't want it to do. I might just quit Lightroom, and so I wanted to show you, so it's you know, yours kind of works the same as mine. On that one, you might need to take the tripod plate off the bottom. I think, is it on the side or is it in the battery compartment?
In the battery compartment.
It is, thank you. Yeah, it's sort of. Okay, so if you open that little hatch with your thumb there, well, the battery will be in there, but I think also on some cameras it slides in the side. It might be that one. That's the case on your camera. I'll just put that back on the tripod before I lose it. Okay, I'll give you the card reader in a sec. I think. No, they don't have them anymore. Which is rubbish, really, because it's save a few quid, I suppose. But you can use mine in just a second. I'll show you through it first of all, and then you can see for yourself. So mine says Nikon D780. I've given it that name, but yours might say no name or something like that. But it'll look something like that grey file. And then if you double click on that, the photos are under DCIM. Can't remember what that stands for.
Camera images there.
Something like that, yeah. Okay, and you can see here, there's a few I shot on JPEG accidentally because I set your cameras up, but I forgot to set mine up. So I'm just going to import the RAW files. Now on my Nikon, RAW files, instead of JPG is JPEG, obviously, and that's the same for all cameras. On my camera, it's NEF, that's the Nikon, one of the Nikon RAW files. I think on yours it's CR2, yeah. For a Canon, it's just called something different, but it is a RAW file. So you can do it in a number. Yeah, I should say at this point, by the way, there's loads of different ways of achieving the same end result. So the way that you do it, fine. I'm not saying this is the correct way. It's just the way I do it. So if I wanted to select all of those, I can just I'll highlight the first RAW file that I want to download, roll to the end one, hold down the Shift key and click on the last one, and it selects all the ones between the first one selected and the last one. And then you can either copy and paste it, or you can just drag it across to RAW file, and it'll take a few seconds, but they should all get dumped in the RAW file there. Yeah. And I'll wait until that's done, and I'll give you my card reader. So.
What did you dump it, sorry, in John's?
John's PP, that's the folder I just created. Yeah. Like I say, you can do this directly from the camera, but I think it's better to get them on the computer straight away, because it's all too easy to forget. And then I'll show you later on how to export the stuff that we've been messing about with, but it's only going to save the stuff after modification, not before. And you probably want the original ones, Okay, so just as a quick pointer, by the way, when you, unlike PC computers, that file, I'm going to eject it now, okay, because you need this file, this card reader. Rather than just unplug the card reader, which I think you can do in PCs, it comes up with a thing saying, warning, you didn't eject it first, and that's usually fine, but once in a blue moon it can corrupt data. So the best thing to do is to drag that down to the trash can, as it's called, or the bin, as it's called, and then you just let it go over the bin. You see it changes to an eject symbol there. I think you can also do it by holding in control or something, but that's just the way I do it. The right click, yeah, that works as well. Yeah. You can have that one if you want to. So there's one slot, which is the one for the SD card. It should only fit in the right way round. That's the one, yeah, I think. So it might be the other way up. I think it's that way round.
Okay.
Let's try that. It doesn't go all the way in. There you go. If you plug that in
Where
there,
does it plug in?
either one of these sockets at the side here. There's two on the right and one on the left.
Oh, yeah.
They're USB-C sockets, which seems to be the standard thing that's there you go, EOS Digital, yeah. They seem to be the sort of standard interface now for most Macs. They don't use the standard USBs anymore.
No, I don't know.
You can get these little adapters. Neil's got one on his computer, that little grey thing, which only costs a couple of quid, but we've got them here, so you don't need to buy one of those. So if you come with a USB stick next week, we can just plug those in using one of those adapters, of which we have plenty. Okay. So yeah, if you just want to drag those images onto the file that you've created, like I say, if we keep the same computers, I'm rather hoping that we can carry on using. We'll do stuff with other images as well. We're not just going to be working on these, obviously, but we can have all the stuff in the same place. But there's always a chance that someone might come and re-image the computer or something, in which case we lose the stuff that we've got. So if you have got a fairly decent-sized memory stick for next week, that would be great. Or a hard drive, provided that hard drive is from Macintosh, because PCs they're formatted differently. but the little pen drives, the little USB sticks, they'll work on anything.
Seagate ones, are they
and you used a Macintosh before, didn't you? You
I
said.
used them on my Mac,
Yeah, they should work for that. I think if you've got a PC formatted one, the Mac usually doesn't recognise them unless they've changed it. Maybe they've made it easier now, I don't know. Okay.
So there was 2 months, there was the Canon one and there was miscellaneous.
It'll be under the, I think it'll be under the DCIM file, yeah.
DCIM and then
Yeah,
the
I've
Canon.
already done all those ones, yeah, but on that one there's nothing in there.
Yeah, it'll be under the, yeah, Canon one.
And they're all CR2s.
That's the one. So you can see they're CR2, so they're all
Yeah.
raw files.
So they're in there already, so.
Oh, you got them, have you?
Yeah.
Great. Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. You can eject the card either now or later. You don't have to do it straight away. Right. So, basically, Lightroom is a good bit of software to use for doing kind of batch stuff. Photoshop, although some of the stuff that these two bits of software do overlap each other, Lightroom is very good for dealing with a large quantity of pictures and doing what we call workflow. So it's usually my go-to just for doing sort of making, well, not basic adjustments. You can do some quite sophisticated stuff in Lightroom, but it works well with a large quantity of photos like what we've got. We've got about 20 or 30 pictures probably. Lightroom, you're going to have to deal with them all separately. The other difference is that all the stuff that we're doing on Lightroom is this filter that's been applied to that image, or a series of filters depending on what we're doing to them. And you can export those after we finish messing about as the sort of versions that we've changed. But the original pictures aren't changed. Okay, so those ones in the file aren't going to change. We're going to create sort of a new version of the ones that we've selected and decided to do stuff with. Photoshop, although you can do something called non-destructive retouching, which is one of the things that I want to show you, which is very useful with Photoshop. Generally speaking, you're usually dealing with one image at a time. So if you want to sort of work on it in a slightly more kind of, what's the word, specific way, things like removing dust marks, you know, or retouching faces or something like that, or sort of, you know, some of the stuff that you can't do on Lightroom. It's a bit more in depth, but it does tend to take a bit longer. So normally I go to Lightroom first and do you know, when I've taken a load of shots, I'll drop them in Lightroom and have a look at them and then decide what I'm going to do. And then some of them I might make some basic corrections on Lightroom and then export them, and you can export them straight into Photoshop and carry on working on them. So we'll probably do that come on week 3. But anyway, to start with, we need to open up Lightroom, which is, if you can see the little cursor down here, it says LRC. There's 2 versions of Lightroom, by the way. There's Lightroom and there's Lightroom Classic. Yeah. Now, we're using Lightroom Classic today. That is the slightly more sophisticated version of Lightroom. Lightroom non-classic is something that you can install on things like phones and tablets, so you can sort of do retouching on the hoof. It's a bit less in depth. Most of the area of the screen and stuff tends to look fairly similar. It's a bit different if you're using it on a phone. But normally, if you're using a laptop or a computer that's on a desk, you will tend to use Lightroom Classic. I think if you buy the version if you subscribe to Lightroom, I think you get both versions. In fact, you can get a free one of Lightroom, and the cloud-based one, the non-classic one, I think you can get it free for a month or something like that if you just want to have a play with it. Okay. Just trying to find desktop. There we go. Right, I think on mine it's underneath Macintosh HD and users and workshop, which is because it's got this segregated thing that goes on my pictures. But can you see when I click on desktop, it's got that file I created?
Yeah, that's right. Is that under?
Oh, yours is a bit different from mine, isn't Oh, sorry, yes.
Library.
Library, yeah.
Library, thank you. Alright, so I'll try and import that.
Sorry, not library up there. This is
Oh.
a thing. Let's just see if I can find it. Click on users, workshops. I think that is us. Desktop.
Okay.
Is yours here? Chris Files?
Chris Wells.
Yeah. Okay. Right. We're not doing, so we don't click import yet, but if I just find it on mine, it should come up with a sort of grid with all our pictures on. John's PP. So you've probably got more than me.
Right, so Mac desktop,
Yeah.
but it's got 3 photographs. So.
That's just the ones that are already on there,
Yeah,
isn't it? We need to find your file, don't we? Joys of technology. Right, so if you look at that grid that you've got,
Yeah.
you can see at the minute there should be a little tick box in the
Oh,
top
I
left hand
thought,
corner
yeah.
of each one.
Yeah.
Basically, if we click on import, which is now down on the bottom right hand side down here,
Yeah, so, yeah.
that will import everything that's got a tick on it. Okay, so let's say that we've got other stuff in that file that we don't necessarily want to order. If you look at the big screen there, can you see where the cursor is now? Is it big enough to see? If I wobble it around a little bit. You can click on that and it says uncheck all, and you can see they go slightly darker like that. So what you can do is you can choose individually which ones that you want to import. Okay. Now I'm going to import all of these because I think generally that's what we do. You know, unless there's some you definitely where you left the lens cap on or something like that. You know, you usually want all of them here. Okay, and then if we click import, it should open all those in a brand new sort of workspace like this.
Yes.
So this is the sort of workspace that we're dealing with. Obviously they're all up there at the minute, we can't see them very well. If you look down at the bottom here, we've got this one live at the minute, grid view. If you click on this rectangle, looks like a picture frame, it will just choose one of those images, usually the ones, on my case, it's the first one that's in sort of slightly paler grey. So if we click on that, but we have still got the others down the bottom in that sort of line. Do you see what I mean? So if you wanted to sort of scroll along and have a look at them, you use the, you can sort of click on it with the mouse if you want to, or I use the cursor keys, like the left, right, up, down one. You can just click the right hand one and it will sort of scroll through them one at a time, like that.
This sounds quite.
Well, you know, this is the thing. I think this is one of the things about photography that oftentimes people are learning about this stuff, and they, you know, they look online and they look at photo books and magazines and stuff like that. And the thing is, the stuff that you're looking at is the best of the best. You know, there's an awful lot of junk. I mean, everyone takes, or even the very highly skilled photographers take rubbish pictures.
Find one that you go, oh, that's quite good.
Yeah. And photography is a process of selection, you know. I mean, first of all, you decide when you're going to go take the camera out, and second of all, you decide what to frame, and then when to press the button, and, you know, all the time you're making decisions about the sort of pictures that you want. So inevitably, there are going to be some that are better than others, and you might find that you've got 3 or 4 pictures that are very, very similar to each other. So what I normally do, and I don't know if you used to do this, Chris, when you were your business, is you can rank them, which is quite useful. So the easiest way of doing that is to, let's say that first one, I prefer the second one. So I'm just going to press the number 1 on the keyboard, and it says set rating to 1. And if you look at it, there's a little asterisk appeared underneath the thing. So, and then you just whiz through, and that's what I normally do. I might have 200 or 300 pictures from a shoot, and I'll blast through them really quickly and just pick out the ones, possible. Possible. That's a good one. Yeah, I'll have that. And then there might be some definitely no good at all. So I'm almost going to sort of pick some at random. But if you want to sort of pick out some ones that you think are a little bit more successful, and, you know, you could choose sort of half of them if you wanted to. That's out of focus. So I've just noticed that when I clicked the star, I clicked on number 1 before I realised it was slightly out of focus. If you want to get rid of the star, all you do is press 0, and the rating's set to 0, so that star will disappear.
So if you put the rating on, does it then create a file with all the ones, if you like, or is that what it does? Or?
It allows you to sort them by ranking.
Yeah.
So I'll show you something else in just a second. And I think if we just do 1 star for the time being, so I'm just going to whiz through and see if I can pick a few.
So sorry, I'm not quite sure where you put the number 1. So
basically, if you say you fancy that one, or just have a picture on the frame, just one that you think's all right.
Okay, this one.
Okay, that one right. Tap number 1. Oh, sorry, I did it for you. Let me get rid of that. Okay, press number 1, and it will say number 1. And can you see little asterisks up there? Yeah. It's very useful. You know, this is, like I say, this is workflow stuff. So again, if you want to just blast through those, you don't have to do them in order. You can sort of go backwards and forwards if you want to just spend a couple of minutes doing that. You know, I think one of the problems is with digital photography, it's fantastic, but you do tend to shoot an awful lot more. You guys might have, you know, come in from, you probably used film when you started taking pictures, even if it was just snaps. And obviously film cost money, and you got 36 pictures or 24 pictures, so you tended to adopt a slightly more considered approach. You didn't sort of take 10 shots, you know, you'd take 2 or 3 maybe of something that you thought was interesting. But with digital, because it's not costing you anything, and because you can fit thousands of pictures on even a fairly small SD card, you tend to shoot a lot, and that's what makes it difficult. I think is almost like, well, it's sometimes difficult to tell which is the best out of these two. Yeah. You've almost got too much choice, you know. So you've ranked a few at number 1, have you, at the minute?
Some ones, yeah.
Okay.
We've got half a dozen.
If you have a look at the big screen again, just down here where the cursor is now, I'm just conscious that I'm recording myself as well. There's a little thing that says filters off. Okay? Yeah. If we click on that and we choose rated, that's what you've just been doing. Click on that, that everything will disappear except the one that you've given 1 star to. Okay, and this is what threw me, because I came in from, I used to use a bit of software called Aperture, which was similar in some ways to this, but they stopped making it, and I'm a bit of a, although it doesn't sound like it, and in a way a bit of a technophobe. I hate having to change the stuff that I'm using, but they stopped supporting it. So I've got to use Lightroom, and this is a problem that I had. I suddenly thought, oh God, half my pictures have disappeared, and I didn't realise about this rated thing. So if you go back to, if you want to get all the pictures back again, you just click on filters off, and all the other ones will disappear, reappear in the same order that you had them in the first place. So what I sometimes do, I mean, we probably don't need to do it because we've got a relatively small number of pictures here, but if I had 200 photographs, say, I'd load them all in, do what we've just done, blast through them, maybe give about, say, a quarter of them 1 star, okay, and then I'll set the rating like that, and I'll have another look through them, and then sort of try and hone it a bit further, saying those two, now that one's better than that one. So what you can do then is, let's say this is one of my chosen ones, it's not a great photograph, the one that's on the board now, I can press number 2, and that assigns it a 2-star rating. And I can do the same thing with some of the others if I wanted to, and you can have all the way up to 5 stars. But let's say if I upgraded some of those number 1s to a number 2, what you can then do, sorry, I'll give you a second to do that. If I'm going too quickly, by the way, do tell me, because, you know, like I say, I'm not so familiar with teaching software, so it's usually in a very, very intense sort of half-hour session with some of our undergraduates, and like, this is a hell of a lot easier than Photoshop in terms of rankings and stuff like that. I think it's quite good the way they've done it. So what I've got now is I've got my 20 pictures, or however they're many. Some of them are assigned to 1 star, some of them are assigned to 2 stars. So normally, you know, the 2-star ones are better than the 1-star ones. So if I then click on rated again, so on that button that says filters off, change it to rated, that's chosen the 1-star and the 2-star. Now if you look towards the bottom here, next to where it says rated, here, can you see there's 1 star in there at the minute where it says filter. If I clicked on the 2nd star, which is greyed out at the minute, it gets rid of all the stuff except that's got 2 stars or higher. So you can see how it works. It means you haven't got to blast backwards and forwards through these pictures to find the ones that you wanted, and it saves you having to write the numbers down as well. And it will remember this, you know, if you open this up again next week, it will still remember the rankings you assigned it. So I'm gonna go back just to 1 star because I was just showing you that. But so those are the ones. If I go on rated, and it's just 1 star, that's just going to pick the 1 star and the 2 star ones. With me so far?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because obviously there are ways, and I'm going to show you this next week. You can actually batch process these images, which is quite useful. But you know, it's unusual that you're shooting a lot unless you're doing things like product photography, maybe doing your processing your scan slides. But again, they're going to be different, aren't they? Unless your father was a sort of very kind of the chances are that you'll need to do stuff to most of these pictures, but the stuff that you need to do them isn't necessarily going to be identical for all of them. So anyway, so for today we're just going to sort of do 1 picture at a time, I think, for the time being. You have questions for me? Or does that seem okay so far? Right, let me consult my notes. I want to make sure I'm doing things in the right order. Okay, that's looking good. Right, so if you look at the top of the screen here, we've got library, develop, map, book, slideshow, print, web. Okay? Yeah. The main 2 that we're using, and to be honest, I don't think I've ever used half of these things, is library is sort of, you know, for doing what we've just been doing, having a quick look through and to look at other pictures. Develop is when we actually want to, well, it's old terminology, isn't it? We actually want to do stuff to these photographs. So if you click on develop there, it's going to change the look of the workspace slightly.
I've got a box come up saying using the develop module.
Mine's telling me about point colour. I think it's just information.
Yeah. If you just close that, it comes up. It's quite good actually. It comes up with hints and tips for you. You know. Which is, you know, sometimes you learn new things because periodically, if you sign up to this stuff, you'll probably every couple of months you'll find there's an update, and it usually tells you there's an update, and it will say, do you want to update it now? You don't have to, but usually it's a good idea to do it fairly regularly, because if you leave it too long and try and update it, it gets a bit confused and it takes forever. So you just click update. You might need to put your password in again, and it'll might come up with a few new things. And again, when you get an updated version, it usually has a screen saying, oh, we've just introduced this, check it out. And there'll be a little tutorial about it. But you don't need to, you can just click on the X if you don't want to read that stuff, you know. They're always changing, but not radically, you know. Okay, so if we just look at the sort of really basic stuff to start with, some of which you might remember. I'm just trying to find a good example that I can use from my photographs here. Okay, let's say that one. It's not a brilliant photo, but it sort of shows something which might be of interest to you. Okay, so if you look right at the top of this sort of column of all this bump on the right-hand side, there is a thing that says. Sorry, I'm just checking it's still recording. Have you got it?
Yeah, it's just the scroll wheel operates upside down.
Is it? That's a bit weird.
PC,
there's probably a way of reversing. Yeah, there's probably a way of reversing it. Some of the wireless mics, you actually sort of stroke the thing. It's very strange. So if we look at this sort of big column, these are all that it actually says. These are the basic adjustments, and it doesn't mean they're basic as in simple. They are fairly simple, but it's the sort of stuff that you will want to do more often. But if you look above that, can you see these 5 icons? I think there should be 5 on yours. Mm-hmm. And there's one that I've got the cursor on at the minute. It looks like sort of 2 of those L-shaped crop tools. And that, as you'd expect, is for cropping. If you click on that, you can see it puts that sort of grid, which is divided into 9 separate rectangles. Have either of you guys come across something called the rule of thirds at all? Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you understand to mean by that, or what's it for?
It's just kind of how it looks right in
yeah.
the third. It's something to 1/3 of the side, not the bang in the middle.
Sure. If you've got a strong vertical or horizontal emphasis in your photograph, it's perfectly all right to have completely symmetric pictures.
Sometimes it works, yeah.
Sometimes that looks good, depending on what it is you're photographing. But if you've got a strong vertical emphasis and it's offset to one side, it looks good for reasons that we don't quite understand, to have it offset by sort of 1/3 to 2/3, and it's part of this thing that the Greeks came up with called the golden ratio. So one of the reasons I took that photo was that pillar there, which is rather distracting, and we could get rid of it altogether. But another thing I could try doing is if you put your cursor on the corner, of any of the corners of your screen, you can actually crop it like that. And you can actually change the, change the ratio, so you can make it like a letterbox format or square or whatever you want to do. There is a way, I've got it set up on mine, so it won't do that unless you tell it to, and I'm not sure. Is it? Yeah, it's right. Okay, this is it. If you want to keep that rectangle the same ratio, but you want to crop your picture, if you hold down the Shift key, which is the one second up from the button that says FN, just keep your finger on it while you click and drag. It should keep the same rectangle. It won't sort of make it into a square or change the shape of that rectangle. That's quite useful.
And once you're happy with it, what do you click?
I was going to say you click the little tick file, but it's not on this one. You hit enter, hit the enter button, yeah. And it gets rid of everything outside that thing. But it's still there. We can go, I'll show you this in a minute, we can revert to the original photograph if we want to. It's not permanently changed that image. That's the important thing to remember, and that's what's quite good about Lightroom, I think. So again, if you want to find a photo that you think could stand a bit of cropping, if you pick it out, crop it. Okay. Yeah, on my version of Photoshop, there's a little sort of tick box at the top, and you click on that and it does it, but enter obviously is the same thing. Okay. Now, I think possibly it might be Chris mentioned about the auto settings on these things. Now, if you, at the top here, there's one of the boxes, sorry, if you look at the big screen a second, you see the one that says auto there. Now, again, it's slightly different from the version I've got, but what that does, I think, is adjust things like contrast, exposure, colour balance, everything, and it sort of makes it what the computer thinks is right, or what the software thinks is right. So it's up here. I've not done it yet, but if you see that, can you see it on the screen? If I click that now, and some of the times it does a fairly good job. It improves the picture. Now, I don't know, the thing is with this screen, this projector, is the colours aren't exactly the same as on my laptop. And that's another thing that we're going to talk about probably a couple of weeks down the line is one of the stumbling blocks of digital photography is the different monitors and prints and stuff like that tend to sort of slightly change the colour and exposure and stuff. So on my picture, it looks rather too yellow, I think. So it's possibly improved it a bit, but I'm going to sort of get rid of that. So what you can actually do is a shortcut, and this is very good. It saves you having to go into all these menus and stuff like that, and it's the same in Photoshop as well. Can you see the command key next to the space bar on the left-hand side of the keyboard? If you press and hold the command key and click on Z, it undoes what you've just done. And I think if you click it again, it redoes what you've just done. Sorry, no, on mine it doesn't. I've got rid of the crop now. Sorry about that. Hang on, I'll give you a hand, sorry.
So, Command Z undoes it?
Undoes the last thing that you've done, yeah. Normally it undoes it, and then you click Command Z again and it redoes it, but the way that these machines are set up is it'll keep undoing things backwards and backwards. I'll see if I'll change it how to do that, because it's... Did you try it and it did something?
I've undone everything, I think, yeah.
Okay, right. Redo the crop, yeah. It's good practice. There is, yeah. You can assign these shortcuts different functions. And if I've got it set up, and I did it when I first got my software, and I've got everything set up how I want. I can't remember. I'll have to go back and find out how to reset it all. But that's cool. Well, like I say, don't worry, because you won't have got rid of anything that. Okay, so let's say the auto thing hasn't produced particularly good results. So what we can do is then go into, on mine it's much too bright, so I'm going to use the exposure, which is up. If you look at the big screen here, there's a slider which will enable you to darken or brighten the photo. And the great thing is with these modern digital cameras, when they're on RAW, is that you can adjust for 2 stops or even more without losing too much detail. You can actually go to minus or plus 2 and you'll get sort of minimal pixelization and drop off of quality. If you try to do the same thing on a JPEG file, it would start to look a bit blocky and rubbish. So this is one of the advantages of using Lightroom. So if you want to try it for yourself, you can just drag that exposure thing around.
With these things, I just mess about with them until I get something I like.
Well, that's a good way of doing it, to be fair. I mean, the other thing is there's not necessarily going to be an exact... there's not going to be an exact look to this picture that is correct.
No.
It's how you want it to look.
And with some of them, you drag them the whole way up and all the way down. You think it doesn't make any difference much. On some of the effects, and you just think, actually, I'll just leave it at 0.
Yeah, it can be. Sometimes it's happening very, very close up, and a lot of these filters that we're going to use, it will allow you to zoom right into that photo. Just to show you, by the way, I don't know if this is something, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to have done this, but you might have read about it or played with it a bit. If you look at right at the top, above where it says basic there, you look at the big screen, can you see it says histogram? Yeah. Okay, if I click on that, it shows this graph. Now, what that graph represents is a distribution of the tonal values of that picture. Okay, so it's everything from on the very, very right-hand side of the image is the sort of blacks, and the very, very left-hand side of the left-hand side of the image is the blacks, and the right-hand side of the image is the white. So as I drag that exposure thing backwards and forwards, can you see that graph moving? Yeah. Okay. Now that graph, I don't know if you've ever found it on your camera, but there is a setting that will enable you to look at that histogram of the photograph in the camera after you've taken it. And sometimes even before you take it, if you're on live view mode. And basically it's quite a useful thing to, when you're using the camera on one of the manual settings, to assess, am I getting the highlights in this shot, or are they too white, are they blown out? Am I getting the shadows in this shot, or are they too dark, are they going to be pitch black? Because normally, whenever you take a picture, you look at the back of the screen and say, yeah, that looks right, or that's too bright, or that's too dark. But the thing is, that screen, if you're looking at that picture in bright sunshine, it looks right, and then you look at it indoors, and it looks wrong, because the light reflects off the screen on the back of the camera, doesn't it? And similarly, the brightness of the screen on these cameras can be adjusted. It doesn't adjust the photographs, but you can make the screens itself brighter or darker. So the histogram is always going to be the same, irrespective of how bright or dark the image looks. And the general idea is that you want the histogram to not overlap the left or the right hand side of the image. So if you can see, if I can drag that right over towards the right hand end, it looks too bright, doesn't it? But we can see that graph is overlapping the right hand end. If it's too far right, it's too light. So if I drag that back down, you can see that forms a sort of mountain peak thing. And now I'm not getting any overlap at the left hand end. Oh dear, my battery's going. Okay. Yours are fully charged. I forgot to recharge mine because I'm an idiot. I do have the charger. One sec. Somewhere. Yeah. How are your batteries doing, guys? I didn't want to have the leads all over the place, but maybe I'll do it for next week.
Because I've been playing with this computer a lot during the week.
Yeah, mine's alright.
It's all right, okay. I mean, they're always fully recharged before we start these things because the cabinet they've got's got a charger in it. Is that going to work?
See, my histogram says this is way too dark, but I quite like the way it looks.
Fair enough. Well, I was going to say, yeah, because the sky you'd kind of expect to be black, wouldn't you? Have you tried dragging exposure? Because you probably find at some point there's going to be some colour coming back into the sky. Now, whether you want that colour or not is a value judgment that you make yourself. I think I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you. But that's what I was going to say. The histogram is not something you've got to religiously obey. For example, if you're photographing a landscape and you've got the sun somewhere in that picture, the sun is always going to be too bright. You know, you're not going to sort of get detail in the sun. Similarly, if you want sort of black shadows in your photograph, and this is something in the studio, you might want sort of black shadows, then you might want no detail in the shadows. I mean, again, one of the things we were doing during the week was photographing against a black backdrop. And the students were shooting, and they were getting you could actually see the wrinkles in the black backdrop still. And I say, well, we can drop the exposure down until we can't see them, provided your main subject looks all right. That's one of the ways of getting around this. But I've just thought I'd tell you about that because it is quite a useful thing in the camera as well. I'm not proposing to sort of get really detailed about it, but I think it's a useful thing to know about. Going down then, so let's say have you adjusted the exposure and it looks okay to you? Fairly happy with it? Yeah, okay, very good. Okay, so underneath these sliders, we've got a contrast control as well. I don't tend to play with that very much. I don't think that usually... Sometimes if it's very low contrast, you might want to boost it a bit, but again, I think it can sort of make the image look a bit unrealistic if you mess about with the contrast too much. These two are quite useful, highlights and shadows, and you can actually do it for whites and blacks as well, but the highlights and the shadows, you can actually make just the highlights brighter or darker, and you can also do the same thing with the shadows, okay? Now, you don't want to overdo this because if you sort of slide these right up to the maximum, you end up with, I don't think you can see it on that, something doesn't look quite right with that image on the screen now. Yeah. It almost looks a bit artificial. I've dragged as you can probably see, the highlights are down to minimum and the shadows are right up to maximum. And it starts to look a bit like these HDR pictures, which are the ones where it flattens the tonal value. You make the sort of skies very, very bright and the land very, very dark. And some people love it, but it looks a bit passy, it's a bit cheesy, I think. Yeah. I sort of don't want to, everyone's got different taste, I suppose. Okay. Moving on down, I'm just showing you the stuff that I find really useful. Texture doesn't seem to do an awful lot to me, but this one's useful. Clarity. Now, this is quite an interesting one. Try sliding the clarity right up, and it sort of gives it quite a sort of stark, strange look. If you take it the other way, it almost puts a soft filter on it. Yeah. Now, as often as not, I will tend to add a little bit of clarity. I don't know, I can't really explain exactly what it is. It's not contrast, but it's similar to contrast. I think it sort of puts a hard edge around stuff, but not in an artificial way. And I find that a lot of my photos benefit from a slight increase in clarity, usually no more than about 10 or 15%, something like that. Or not percent, but that number, you can see the number change as you do the slidey thing. Dehaze, again, I mean, I don't really use that. I don't think it's got any useful function in this. The other one that I do use is vibrance. That makes the colours pop more or less, depending on what you want. So quite often I'll give a slight boost to the vibrance without making it look too artificial, Okay. So if you want to, have you having a bit of a play with that?
Yeah. What I find is sometimes I do quite a lot of editing and then I think, I just don't like it, I'll just start again because I've gone too far with everything. I think it looks quite fake, like you say.
Yeah.
Especially with the colour. I find when I try and alter the colour, it's too saturated.
It's easy
to change the skin tones and
it's easy to do, isn't it? Yeah. Again, if you're working for a client, it might be that the client wants these really bright poppy colours and it might not be the sort of thing that you want. Now, there is quite a useful thing because, as you say, if you're just doing this stuff fairly subtly, you can work on a picture and you think, wow, what did it look like before? It's difficult to tell. Well, if you have a look at the big screen again, can you see there where it says YY? Click on that and it'll do a before and an after. YY, yeah. And if you keep clicking on it, it changes the way it contrasts other stuff. If you want to get rid of that YY, you just click on the frame logo again, that one right at the corner. Can you see it, Chris?
No, I couldn't quite see it.
If you want to get rid of that double image,
Okay.
yeah, basically what that's doing is it's showing you a before and after. So that's the picture as it came out of the camera, and that's after all the stuff that we've just done to it, including the crop. You know, it's quite a useful thing, I think. And you can sort of tell whether you've overdone it a bit as well.
Yeah.
And I probably have overdone this a bit, you know. But it's I'm just playing, so it doesn't matter too much. Okay. Tone curve. I might talk about that a bit next week. This is another way of adjusting the contrast in a slightly more controlled way. You're nodding. Have you used this a bit?
I've had a plea with
Okay. Yeah.
curve.
Have you? Right. Okay.
And it was actually quite a subtle word thing.
It is. Yeah.
It's more controllable.
Well, I mean, one thing that I quite often do is, and to be honest, I think, let me just go up. I might just take the contrast. Oh no, I didn't put any contrast in there, did I? What I quite often do, if you want to increase contrast in a slightly subtle way, because I think the contrast slider is a bit brutal, you know, is do something called an S-curve, which is when you add one pixel to the top of that graph. I don't know if you can see it on the big screen there, and then you can drop another one lower down, and you sort of bend that straight line into a very, very subtle sort of S shape. So that's sort of a slightly more selective way of doing the contrast control. And this looks too contrasty now, but you know, it's fine. I'm just playing. I mean, nighttime is contrasty. You know, if we were doing landscape stuff, I think this would, as often as not, it would improve stuff unless you're taking stuff during very intense sunshine, which we don't tend to get very much in this country. And even when we do, there's always a lot of stuff in the air, you know, water vapour and pollen and stuff, which tends to soften the landscapes. It's quite weird when you go to countries, you know, that sort of very dry. You notice, and when I went to Australia for the first time, just walking down the street, I was thinking, you know, I was a bit jet lagged, but I was thinking something about the light is very stark. You know, the shadows are so deep, and it's interesting. You know, and you look at stuff like that all the time with photos. Now, there is a sharpen tool if we carry on down a bit. Again, I don't tend to use that. There's not a lot you can do if your photographs are out of focus, but you might be able to make them look a little sharper on that, but it'll never sort of refocus them entirely.
Make it a bit more pixelated, though. So
It-
it
yeah.
the edges, but makes the interior a bit more grainy.
Yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't look,
It's a bit weird, isn't it?
especially if you overdo it, it can look a bit strange.
Yeah.
I might pop into another photo just to show you the next bit. Let me see if I can find a different. I mean, you can stick with the same one if you want to, but just one that demonstrates something else I wanted to show you. Yeah, this one might be good. Okay, so I haven't done anything to this photo, but I'm down looking at this lens corrections thing now. If you click on that, sorry, have you both found it? It's again, as we scroll down, it's under that column. It just amazes me, this stuff. It's so clever. It will identify almost always the lens that you use to take this photograph. Lenses are not without error, you know, even the very expensive Leica ones, but the sort of more inexpensive lenses, like these so-called kit lenses, are built down to a budget. Now, one of the things that you'll find is, and it's not too bad on this one, but I think you can see it. I mean, mine's quite an expensive lens, so it's not too bad, but you sometimes notice things like curvature of stuff at the edge, like that wall. That is straight, but it looks slightly curved on that. And that's something called barreling that you get at wide-angle lenses. Some lenses suffer from something called barreling, which makes the image look sort of kind of like that. You know, it almost makes things look a bit of a fishbowl. Not as much as that, but. And there's another one called pin cushioning, which is sort of the opposite. Certain lenses do this, which almost kind of squidges things in. And it tends to be just at the wide angle end of the lens if you're using a zoom. you will get distortion with wide-angle lenses to a certain extent, but the really expensive lenses sort of minimises the distortions. You get the wide angle without this curvature, and that's why some lenses are so expensive, like for Leica cameras or Hasselblads, or some of the very expensive sort of Canon and Nikon gear. The other thing that you've got is something called achromatic aberration, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it basically means that when you shine light through glass, which is what lenses are essentially, when you shine the light through a glass, you refract it. It tends to scatter the light to a certain extent. The most dramatic one being like in a prism. Do you know the Pink Floyd, the band, the album? There's one called The Dark Side of the Moon, which is that picture of the light ray and the triangle, and it comes out as a rainbow. That's what prisms do. They split white light down into its constituent parts. Now, lenses are not simple, there's groups of elements of lenses within most camera lenses. The idea being, the reason why they don't just use one or two lenses is some of these lenses are designed to reduce that achromatic aberration, and to a certain extent the pin cushioning and the barreling as well, and they sort of cancel each other out, as it were. So the idea is you don't want anything that this achromatic aberration, it tends to show up as sort of colour fringing on the edges of stuff, particularly in very sunny conditions. They've got various coatings on that, sort of bluey green sort of coating is designed to reduce that as well, but it happens a bit. And this has actually got these lenses characteristics programmed in. So if you click on remove chromatic aberration, it might not make a huge difference. It might make the difference to certain photographs more than others, but the idea is, if you click on it, does it make much difference? No. We might do if we're doing daylight stuff here, or if we're zoomed right into the picture as well.
Enable profile connection. Correction.
This is the other one. This gets rid of the distortions, hopefully. Try clicking it.
Yeah, I've tried it.
Okay, so it gets rid of some of that. I mean, it's not made the picture perfect, but it's got rid of some of the distortions that you get with that, whatever lens it is using. And you can see on mine, it says it's a Nikon AFS Nikkor 24-70mm. Oh, it's so clever, isn't it? It knows what lens shot that picture. Has it got? It probably got a Canon whatever on your. Yeah.
It's moved quite a lot.
Yeah. This is down to something called metadata. Okay, so whenever you take a photograph, the photograph itself is data. Metadata is data about data. So whenever you take a picture, as well as recording the picture itself, it records information about the camera, the lens that you use, the settings of the camera, the ISO, even things like the serial number of the camera. And on some of the posher cameras, you can even put in, it'll detect where you are and give you the longitude and latitude and stuff like this. And that's always recorded. So the software is picking up the metadata so it knows what lens I used. I just think it's so clever, And you can adjust that amount. You can increase or reduce the amount of distortion that you get as well. I don't think this is a huge problem, but if you're doing things like architectural photography, it can sort of slightly help you get better results. With me on that one? Okay. Right. If we go down to transform, the next one down, this one I do find useful, okay? Basically, and this is partly why I chose this particular photograph, I shot it with quite a wide angle lens, and you get distortions, with that. But because I was pointing the camera slightly up, you can see that the verticals of this building are kind of, they're coming to a common vanishing point, single point perspective. Now, that's fine, I'm not saying it destroys the picture or anything like that, but if we were doing stuff like architectural photography, or if you wanted to have these edges parallel to each other, what this transform will do is actually to sort of effectively put that picture on a sheet of rubber and stretch it out, and correct those converging vertical parallels or horizontal parallels. And again, it's got an auto correction. Can you see where the cursor is there? If I click on auto, it will try and recognize the verticals and the horizontals, and it will try and make them parallel with the edge of the frame. And a lot of the time, it works very well.
Yeah, that straightens it out.
Yeah, it's quite clever. It doesn't always get it right. Certain things tend to confuse it. This is probably, I don't know, have you guys noticed much difference when you hit the auto thing? Yeah. Looks good, doesn't it? Like I say, you can't always rely on it But a lot of the time, it's a quick and dirty.
It just pulls it in.
Yeah.
Strings it.
It's really good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you can do it manually as well. And one of the useful things is for example, if you got your horizon slightly off level, assuming you wanted it level, you can sort of click the level one and it recognises the horizontal lines. And again, you can adjust it yourself. You can use these sliders. And if you look at that as a very extreme version, can you see what it's doing? It's almost like putting perspective, artificial perspective on that picture. Now, if we were to use that, I think you need to crop it afterwards. But for certain things, it's jolly useful. And the rotate one, let me see, hang on, vertical. The rotate one's quite useful as well. Because again, you don't always want your stuff straight. You might want to put a bit more of an angle on it, or you might want to reduce that angle, because for certain things it won't recognise that. This auto thing works well with stuff like buildings, because there's plenty of straight edges and they're all parallel to each other. If you were doing the same thing with a lot of trees, for example, it probably wouldn't cope with that very well. But it is useful for stuff like this, and it does make quite a difference. So again, if you wanted to check what that looks like, you can click on the little YY thing and it sort of shows you before and after. Doink. Yeah. So for townscapes, sorry?
Sometimes it does help, doesn't it, having the two together like
It
that?
certainly does. Yeah,
Sometimes you're not sure when you're flicking between them.
Yeah.
When they play, you think, oh yeah, no, it is.
Well, sometimes you look at it and you think, well, what have I done to that? It doesn't look that much different. And then once you've got them two next to each other, it's blindingly obvious that you've made that adjustment. Yeah. Guys, that's 8:45.
Okay.
It is.
Yeah.
Time flies.
So I've rattled through the sort of basic stuff. I think we'll see if we can get a bit more in depth with it next week, because there's some of this stuff that we can sort of start to do once we've got the basics set. But you'll notice that this image, well, the both the images I'm working on have got this little sort of plus minus thing in the edge now, which indicates that these ones we've been messing about with.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Now I'll just show you one thing very quickly. I think we'll hopefully, if we get the same machines as last week, so if you make a note of, because you've got a different number on yours now, haven't you, Chris? And hopefully if no one's wiped our images, we can carry on working on the same stuff. Okay.
I've got 17.
If we wanted to export those images, okay, or let's say just one of them. So that one I've just done, okay? So click on File at the top there. If you can't see the stuff at the top, it's just move the mouse up there. And if you click on Export, okay, it's asking you where you want to put it. So you can choose a specific folder if you want to. Can you see on the big screen? If I click on Choose there, let's see, I might drop it in the same, hang on, desktop. Oh. I might drop it in the same folder.
Same folder.
Okay. So if I choose that, this is just doing one picture at the minute. Now, obviously, if I sort of copy that, it's going to have the same number as the existing one. So normally you'd give it another name. So you can rename it by ticking that little box there. So I'll put test PP or something, no matter. Now you can also do that as a batch thing. So you can assign all those pictures a name, so it will say test PP01, test PP02 and so on, and it will do that automatically, which saves you an awful lot of trouble. I won't go through the other stuff at the minute. Now the image format, okay, I can export that as a Photoshop file if I wanted to work it on Photoshop, as a TIFF, which I was talking about before, as the original if I wanted to. I'm going to export it as a JPEG, okay. It'll ask you what size you want it to be. Resolution, 300 dpi, that's the number of pixels per inch. That's pretty good quality. 200 to 300 should be fine, even if you want to make a really big print. If you wanted a very low quality picture just to pop on social media, you can do it as 100 or 150 or something like that. And then the other thing that we can do, which is not showing at the minute. Oh yes, here we go. I find this very useful. The quality at the minute, it's doing it maximum quality. Can you see the box on the big screen there, where it says limit file size to, and that's in K. So if I say wanted that image to be no bigger than 500 megabytes, sorry, 5 megabytes, I could type in 5,000 K, is it 1,000 K to a megabyte? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I put 5,000. That picture, it might not be exactly 5 megabytes, but it's going to be no bigger than 5 megabytes. And then just hit export. And it'll give you this warning thing, just click on continue, and it'll drop that picture fairly quickly. It says up the top there, exporting one file into wherever it is you've chosen. I find that useful because when I'm doing picture library stuff, they don't want image sizes normally any bigger than 8 megabytes. So I can just do it as a batch. I don't need to resize every one. Okay. And that is the end. Do you have any questions for me?